My uncle spent 8 months convincing our entire family that I was a drug addict. He fabricated stories, planted doubt, and ultimately succeeded in having me removed from my grandmother's will entirely. I never argued with him. I never defended myself. I never let him see what I was doing. For 2 years, I let him believe he had won. He found out he hadn't at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner, in front of everyone he'd ever lied to. My grandmother Eleanor built everything herself. She emigrated from the Philippines at 29 with 2 suitcases and a nursing license. By 60, she owned 3 properties, a modest investment portfolio, and a reputation in our community that people spoke about with actual reverence. She had 2 children, my mother, who moved to Canada when I was 4 and largely disappeared from our lives, and my uncle Dennis, her son, her favorite, the one who stayed close, managed her finances, drove her to appointments, and reminded her daily how devoted he was. I was raised by Eleanor after my mother left. Not officially, there was no paperwork, no formal adoption. But from age 5, it was her kitchen I woke up in, her voice that checked my homework, her hands that braided my hair before school. She called me her shadow. I called her Lola, the Filipino word for grandmother. She called me hers. Dennis tolerated me the way you tolerate a stray that someone else brought inside. Polite when Eleanor was watching, distant when she wasn't. When I was 27, Lola had a mild stroke. Nothing catastrophic, her speech returned within weeks, but it changed things. She started talking about her will, about what she wanted to leave behind and who she wanted to leave it to. Dennis became very attentive after that. The rumors started in March. My cousin B texted me first. Awkward, apologetic. "Hey, just wanted to give you a heads up. Dennis has been telling people some stuff about you." I don't believe it, but others might. I called her immediately. She told me that at a family gathering I hadn't been invited to, Dennis had told the extended family that I had a drug problem. Specifically, that I'd been using methamphetamine for over a year, that Eleanor didn't know, that he'd personally witnessed me in a state during a visit to her house, that he was heartbroken but felt the family deserved to know. I sat with that information for a long time before I responded. I had never used drugs. Not recreationally, not experimentally, not ever. I had a full-time job as a project manager at a logistics company, a spotless record, and a lease I'd held for 4 years without a late payment. But Dennis had something I didn't: time, access, and 3 decades of credibility with everyone who mattered. By April, the distance was visible. Aunts who used to call stopped calling. Cousins who would have believed me chose to believe him instead, or more accurately, chose not to get involved. At Easter dinner that year, I watched my uncle perform grief. He shook his head sadly when relatives asked how I was doing. He said he was praying for me. He said Eleanor didn't know everything yet, but he was handling it carefully. No one asked me directly. That was perhaps the most precise cruelty, being convicted without a trial. In June, Lola called me on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice was careful in a way it had never been with me before. She asked how I was sleeping, whether the first was eating, whether I was okay. I asked her what Dennis had told her. There was a pause that lasted 4 full seconds. I counted. "He said he's worried about you," she said finally. "He said you've been struggling." I asked her if she believed him. Another pause. "I don't know what to believe, Anak." "Anak? Child." She still called me that. But something in her voice had shifted. A door had closed. Not all the way, but enough. That night, I drove to her house. We sat on her porch until 11 p.m., and I told her everything I could. She listened. She held my hand. She said she loved me. But when I left, I noticed Dennis's car parked 2 streets over. He had been there the whole time. 2 months later, Lola updated her will. My cousin V called me, crying. Dennis had arranged for a lawyer to visit the house on a Tuesday afternoon when Lola's regular caretaker was off. He was present for the entire meeting. By the end of it, my name had been removed from the document entirely. Everything, the house, the portfolio, the rental property in Cavite, would pass to Dennis and a family foundation he controlled. I received nothing. I didn't confront him. I know that's not what people expect, but I had learned something from watching Dennis operate for 8 months. He was good at this. He had rehearsed every version of this conversation. He knew exactly what to say if I came at him emotionally. He would perform patience and pain and concern, and everyone watching would see a man being unfairly attacked by the troubled niece he was only trying to help. So I didn't go to him. I went to work. I requested a copy of my employment records, 3 years of performance reviews, all rated exceeds expectations. I got a letter from my doctor documenting my medical history, including a clean tox screen from a routine physical 8 months earlier. I contacted the lawyer's office that had drafted Lola's updated will and requested, through proper channels, confirmation of the date and circumstances of its execution. Then I called my cousin B. B was the one family member who had never fully accepted Dennis's story. She was also, and this mattered, a registered nurse who had worked in addiction medicine for 6 years. She knew what substance dependency looked like. She had never seen anything in me that matched. She was also the person who told me something I hadn't known. Lola had a second will. Not the updated one Dennis had arranged, an earlier one drawn up 3 years prior by a different lawyer, a woman named Attorney Reyes, who had been Lola's friend for 20 years and who Eleanor had specifically chosen because she didn't share her with Dennis. B had found the copy while helping Lola organize documents after the stroke. She had kept quiet because she didn't understand its significance at the time. Now, she did. I drove to see Attorney Reyes the following Thursday. She was 68, quiet, and precise. She remembered Eleanor well. She told me that the will she had prepared was still legally valid, that a newer will would supersede it, but only if it met specific standards of voluntary execution. She looked at me over her reading glasses. Was your grandmother alone when she signed the new document? She was not. For the next 14 months, I lived 2 lives. On the surface, I was the disgraced niece. I attended the family events I was still invited to, fewer now, but some. I spoke to Dennis politely when I saw him. I asked after his wife. I admired photos of his grandchildren. I never once let him see anything other than someone who had accepted her fate. Underneath, I was building a case. Attorney Reyes connected me with an estate attorney who specialized in undue influence claims. This is a legal concept most people don't know exists, the idea that a will can be invalidated if someone in a position of trust manipulated the testator into signing it. Dennis had been Lola's primary caretaker. He had power of attorney for her finances. He had been present during the will signing. He had, in the months prior, systematically isolated her from the family member she trusted most. Every element was documented. I requested Lola's phone records through a formal process and found that in the 2 weeks before the will signing, she had called me 7 times. 6 of those calls had lasted under 90 seconds, my calls going to voicemail, which I had never received. My number had been blocked on her phone. Dennis had set up her new phone after the stroke. I hired a private investigator to look into Dennis's financial history. What he found took 3 months to surface fully. Dennis had been borrowing against Lola's rental property for years. Small amounts, consistently, through a shell structure that obscured his name. The total drawn over 11 years was just under $340,000. Lola had no idea. I also learned, through B, who remained my inside source, that the family foundation Dennis had written into the new will had no independent board, no public filings, and a registered address that was his own home. It wasn't a foundation. It was a mechanism. By the time I had everything organized, I had 4 binders. I kept them in a fireproof safe in my apartment. I made copies with 3 different people, B, Attorney Reyes, and my estate attorney. Then I waited for the right moment. It came in the form of Lola's 80th birthday. Dennis organized the party, of course he did, 43 family members at a rented function room at a hotel in the city, catered Filipino food, a photo slideshow, a program that centered Dennis as the devoted son who had given up so much to care for his mother. I was invited, barely. My name was added to the group chat 3 days before the event, after Lola personally asked why I hadn't been included. I confirmed immediately. The night before the party, I met with my estate attorney. The undue influence claim was ready to file. The financial fraud documentation had been reviewed by a forensic accountant. We were prepared to move the following Monday, but I had one thing to do first. I arrived at the party early and helped set up. I carried chairs. I arranged centerpieces. Dennis watched me from across the room with the expression of a man who believes he is watching someone perform dignity they no longer deserve. I smiled at him. When Lola arrived, I hugged her and held on for an extra moment. She whispered that she was glad I had come. I told her I would always come. The program began. Dennis gave a speech. It was beautifully constructed, warm, specific, full of real memories that made people cry. He was genuinely good at this. I will give him that. When it was over, he invited family members to share their own messages. I raised my hand. He hesitated, just for a second, before nodding. I walked to the front of the room. I thanked Lola for everything she had ever given me. I said that the most important thing she taught me was that the truth does not expire. It simply waits. Then I looked at Dennis directly and said, I also have a gift for the family tonight. For context, I nodded to B, who was seated near the projector. The screen behind me came to life. Not dramatic, just documents. Clean, clear, organized. The first slide showed the financial records, the 11 years of withdrawals from Lola's property, the structure used to obscure them, the total amount. The room went very quiet. The second slide showed Lola's phone records, the 7 blocked calls, the date range 2 weeks before the will signing. The third slide was a statement from attorney Reyes, Lola's original attorney, confirming that the first will, which included my name, had been drawn up without Dennis's involvement and remained legally documented. The fourth slide was a single paragraph from my estate attorney confirming that an undue influence claim had been filed that morning. Not Monday. That morning. I had moved the timeline up by 3 days. Dennis stood up. He was very controlled, I will say that. His voice did not shake. This is not the place for this, he said. I know, I said. But you chose the place 8 months ago when you told 40 people I was a drug addict in a room I wasn't allowed to enter. So here we are. A cousin asked if any of it was true. Dennis said it was fabricated. I placed a printed folder on each table. Every family member had their own copy before he finished his sentence. Lola had not moved. She sat at the center table with her hands folded, watching Dennis with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not shock. Something older than shock. Something that had been waiting a long time to arrive. Dennis, she said quietly. He turned to her. A knack, she said, the same word she had used for me. And then she said nothing else. She didn't need to. The legal proceedings took 11 months. The undue influence claim was successful. The updated will was invalidated based on 3 factors. Dennis's presence during signing, the documented pattern of isolation, and testimony from Lola's regular caretaker who confirmed that she had never been informed of the signing appointment and that Dennis had specifically arranged the meeting on her day off. The original will attorney, Reyes's version, was reinstated. The financial fraud investigation took longer. In the end, Dennis repaid $280,000 to Lola's estate as part of a civil settlement negotiated to avoid criminal charges. He avoided prison. Lola had asked me to allow that. I did. I won't tell you what his standing is in the family now. That story is still being written in silences at gatherings and phone calls that don't happen as often as they used to. I will tell you what Lola said to me the week after the party. We were on her porch again, same chairs, same time of night. She said, I should have known. A woman who builds things from nothing knows what it looks like when something is being taken apart. I asked her why she hadn't trusted me when it mattered. She was quiet for a long time. Because he was my son, she said. And love is the oldest blindfold there is. I held her hand. She fell asleep in her chair the way she sometimes did. And I stayed until the lights on the street came on one by one. My uncle thought silence was surrender. He didn't understand that some people go quiet because they're done talking and they've started working. The most dangerous thing you can do to a person who is building a case is give them 2 years of uninterrupted time to build it. He gave me exactly that.